now we move on to our next talk of the day from Jonathan Hall, who will talk about owl conservation in Southern Africa. If Jonathan is ready, the floor is all yours, Jonathan.
Okay, so my presentation is just really about owls and conservation in South Africa or in Southern Africa, and it's primarily focused on education. There are other owl-related issues in Africa, as there are in most of the rest of the world, in terms of habitat loss and that sort of thing. But this is just, we have some unique problems in terms of mythology. I know not unique globally, because mythology is kind of global, but we have a situation in South Africa where owls are viewed with lots of their mythological fears, and how to address those mythological fears is our sort of charter. So in terms of the objectives of what we've been working on for the last, I don't know, 20 odd years, we identified a couple of areas that we wanted to get further information on. Some of these are quite difficult because traditional healers, traditional medicine, Muti, mythology, a lot of it people don't want to discuss. It's secretive, especially when dealing with traditional healers. So to get information, to get access to these guys so we can actually have a frank chat with them about what's going on has been tricky. But over the years, we've built relationships with traditional healers who talk to us and give us information and tell us what's going on. So this is the basic nuts and bolts of it. Traditional healers, South Africa is quite unique in many respects, because where most countries have spent the last 100 years sort of letting go of their witchcraft laws and repealing them or abrogating them or whatever it's been, South Africa actually has been increasing or intensifying. Or in 1957, the Suppression of Witchcraft Act was passed, which put more pressure on supposedly witches. And this was designed to tackle traditional healers so that they kind of went underground at that stage. It was the apartheid South Africa, and traditional healers were seen to be to incite all sorts of things. So there was an act passed to control them or to make it illegal to be a traditional healer. Once apartheid was over, traditional healers, because of their cultural heritage and the fact that they're part of the South African landscape, were kind of sort of brought back into the light, and there was less control on them, and they were able to practice in the open. One of the things that we have here is, because of trying to embrace all cultures and trying to embrace historical traditional medicine as a post-apartheid South Africa, there's been I suppose it's going too far to accommodate everybody in certain respects. And one of the things that's happened here is that traditional healers are lobbying the Health Professional Council of South Africa to become registered as dispensers of medicine, or being able to dispense medicine, so that in a situation where people go to a traditional healer and they're prescribed a form of Muti, which may be herb-based or something like that, they can then, traditional healers are in a situation where they can claim, or the person paying for it can claim that back from the medical aid as a legitimate medicine. One of the consequences of that are, it's concerning, because the worst case scenario is you're having people booked off work for a week because, in a simplistic way, they saw a black cat walk across their path, which is not good economically, and not good, for all of those reasons, those obvious reasons. And there's been pushback from the professional council or medical council saying, well, this can't work. And also, all medicines that traditional healers dispense should be registered before they're allowed to be claimed on it via medical aid. So there's a lot of potential financial implications for that. This is a picture of a traditional healer in downtown Johannesburg, and they're very impressive guys. They train, they go off into the mountains for months on end, training with other traditional healers. And the word Muti actually is an indigenous word or a Zulu word for plants. So a lot of the traditional healing is plant-based, and has merit. I mean, as most of our Western medicines have, they're also plant-based. So, but this is the guy, this is where you would go if you were sick, and you go and chat to him and he would prescribe something for you. So in South Africa, there's a lot of people who use traditional healers. And it's not an uneducated thing. It's often a highly educated thing, just because our history is so short as a new South Africa that there's kids now who've gone to university and become accountants and lawyers and professional people, but their parents use traditional healers. So it's a sort of muscle memory for them to go to a traditional healer when they're not well. Some of the traditional healing is a little, I don't know, I suppose dark is the right word. So they advertise, here's an advertising board of a traditional healer. They call themselves doctor, and they advocate, or they advertise that they can sort out troubled marriages, they can bring back, can change bad luck, they can remove evil spirits. And that's where the owl-related problems really come in, because owls, because of their mythological sort of position or the fear of owls, they're often used in this way to create spells or remove spells, and quite extensively. I mean, this is a traditional market that we've looked at in Johannesburg, and it's the biggest traditional market, I think, definitely in Gauteng. And maybe in South Africa. I know there's another one in KwaZulu-Natal, which is also quite big, but this is a large traditional market. And that's what it looks like. You can see there leopard skin hanging up. There's a whole lot of birds here in the foreground, vultures, kites, and they have tables where, you know, people go and take bits off these animals for health, for cursing, for removing curses, for making money, for not making money. And one of the things in South Africa is that it's become quite porous. Our borders have become quite porous. So there's lots of people moving in from other parts of Africa, from Ghana, from Nigeria, from Zimbabwe, Botswana, places like that. And they're bringing their own traditional medicine requirements. So in many parts in Joburg, you've almost got not suburbs, but areas that are Congolese or Nigerian or Ghanaian. And they will go to traditional healers, their own traditional healers that will source things from South Africa to service their particular requirements. So that's pretty much what it looks like. Here's another example. This is the kind of Muti market that is plant driven. And there's, I mean, some of this is putting pressure on rare and indigenous species in South Africa, like wild ginger, for example. I mean, ginger is a good medicinal plant, but the harvesting of it sort of relentlessly or without any control is making it making it difficult for wild ginger and many other plants that are presented at this table. But to the owls, we basically wanted to know what the extent of it was. And 20 years ago, we did a survey of these tables, and we asked people, how many owls do you have? Do you have them dead or alive? What species are they predominantly? And what's the supply and demand? And we came away saying, we didn't think that owls and traditional medicine was a problem. We saw a couple of owls on the tables. The majority of them looked like they'd been hit by cars. So they'd been collected off the side of the road, and they found their way to these tables. But I think 20 years ago, there was, it was more underground, and the tables were sparse. They were, you know, people were suspicious. They didn't want to give information. There was, the police, they were scared of the police, they were scared of all of those things, so they weren't forthcoming with information. Now what we're seeing is it's almost in terms of South Africa, it's no longer an issue. Even though owls are protected, they blatantly have owls out on tables, and they'll happily talk about it. And also policemen and politicians and all sorts of people go to these tables, so it's not you know, hidden anymore. So this is what we wanted to establish, what the usage was from. This is from one market in South Africa. So we had a whole lot of questions that we asked people. How do you get hold of these owls? Do you receive them alive or dead? What kind of owl species do you receive? What do you receive the most of? How often do you receive them? How much do you pay for them? How much do you sell them? And do you know anything about owls themselves? And one of the things that was quite interesting is a lot of the traditional healers were quite clued up on owls. They were quite clued up on what they do, where they live, what they are, and the prices changed or fluctuated dramatically. Still a lot of accident, sort of road casualties and things like that were being collected, which was predominantly barn owls, our spotted eagle owl, and our marsh owls and things like that were being picked up. And those are our most common road casualty cases. And they were still finding their way onto the tables, but also some live owls. And that was what they were looking for. That was actually what they wanted. They wanted live owls more than dead owls. And just when looking at the prices were, and they change. I mean, to kind of bring bad luck or to create bad luck for someone was 4,000 Rand. And 4,000 Rand is about $400 roughly. So quite a lot of money. And then to remove bad luck was obviously more expensive, because when you remove bad luck with a traditional healer, it's automatically placed. The bad luck is then placed on the person who caused you the bad luck in the first place. And then that guy has to go and have it removed at some stage down the road. And that was about $600. But the interesting thing about it is we looked at 417 tables. Now, these are tables underneath the highway overpass in Johannesburg. And the majority of them were plant species, but 60 of those tables had birds present on the table, and 90% of the tables with birds had owls present. And on the one occasion we went to and looked, they had two live barn owls at the table. So on the bird specialist, and you get that, you get plant specialists, you get bird specialists, you get all of those things. I mean, they've had pangolin on these tables, they've had vultures, they've had all sorts of things, but 90% of the bird tables had owl skins present. Have I gone the wrong way here? I seem to be going the wrong way. What does that mean? So Muti, there's two kinds of Muti. This picture is a guy who, this was a story in the Daily Sun, one of the local newspapers here. A guy who had a tin buried in his garden and he had bad luck and he lost his job and he did all sorts of things. This guy paid 30,000 Rand, which is $3,000 to remove this bad luck. And when they dug up this tin, that's an owl, a bit of an owl head and skin and what have you inside here. There was a broken knife and all sorts of things, a $2 note, or 2 Rand note, which made sure he wouldn't make any money. And this is black Muti. This is the kind of cursing of people. White Muti is dealt with healing and cleansing. Black Muti is dealt with placing curses and having curses removed and winning the lottery or not winning the lottery or that sort of thing. And owls play a part in that kind of situation. So it's expensive. It costs money. People spend money. And this is where owls and Muti kind of collide. So when we looked at the supply and demand of the tables, we were finding that they were using about 70 owls a month, okay, which we thought was quite high. And there were specialists who would just deal with owls. And they've had other owls. They've had Pellets fishing owl, and they've had giant eagle owl, and they've had Vero's eagle owl on these tables. But the turnover was about 70 owls a month, and the predominantly spotted eagle owl, barn owl, and marsh owl. Okay, so in terms of resolving this, there are a couple of options. There's legislation, there was enforcement, and there was education. And in South Africa at this stage, the legislation is all in place. I mean, South Africa has very good legislation when it comes to protecting its environment and the species within South Africa. Enforcement it does not happen. There's no enforcement in this country. It's just we've got bigger problems than owls on tables. So the only way to kind of deal with this was through education. The legislation was there, but the enforcement was not at all possible. So education was the way to move forwards. In terms of the legal protection, they're protected by the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act. Permits are required. And as I said, enforcement is poor to non-existent. And also because owls are not really rhinoceros. You know, a lot of people in power, a lot of people in government, a lot of people in this country are scared of owls. They've been brought up that way. There's mythological fear of owls. If an owl lands on your roof, it means that someone's going to die. And so they're not prone to let's protect this and let's put lots of effort into protecting owl species, especially in South Africa and predominantly and presumably in the rest of Africa. The other problem is that the conservation staff who work for these conservation departments, these departments are often understaffed and they're often undertrained. So they're rushing all over the place to deal with the rhinoceros issues and the pangolin issues and those kind of iconic conservation issues in South Africa, and owls don't fall into that category. So they're not really protected. So essentially, in terms of our education drive, rehabilitation centers in this country, we're getting in about 150 young owls every year. And some of these coming from townships, from poor areas, and these owls would be handed in or collected from roofs. And the idea was to try and leave these owls in place. Instead of removing them and taking them to a rehabilitation center where they'd be released, or to a zoo where they'd end up in a zoo, the idea was to try and convince people to leave these owls exactly where they found them. And sometimes that wasn't easy or isn't easy because owls in townships, in these high density areas, the rodent populations are very high. So by going and removing the chicks from a nest to try and appease the homeowner, barn owls especially, 6 weeks later, they're down on new chicks or they're down on eggs again, and the whole problem starts all over again. And convincing everybody of the value of owls became the education drive. It's difficult in many of these places because children don't have access to television, they don't have access to books all that often, they don't generally have access to the internet. So it's not easy for them to learn more about something unless it's presented to them directly. But one of the things that was interesting is that when talking to people about the terrifying owl experience or the mythological owl that they were so scared of, it often didn't match the owl you were holding in your hand. So if you were holding a barn owl and saying to kids or to adults, is this the owl that you're scared of? They would almost, entirely say, not at all. That's not the owl we're scared of. We're scared. And the owl that they were scared of was almost like a fire-breathing mythological owl that was a messenger from the devil sort of thing. So it was really just about educating and showing people the value of owls in these areas. So what we did was, with these young owls that came in, we started putting them back. So if we went to somebody's house and they had owls on the roof and they were making a noise and they were terrified of owls, we'd chat to them, we'd take owl pellets on the side of the road and we'd break them up and show them how many rat skulls were in those pellets. And we'd try and convince people to put up an owl box somewhere more suitable than so the owls weren't in their ceiling. We'd move those chicks into the owl box and would leave it at that, and the adult owls would come back and raise those chicks. And once we, in these high density areas, rodents are a huge problem. They're really a big problem because a lot of these places are filled with litter, filled with the waste collection. We don't have first world waste collection systems and things like that. So I think there's stuff lies in the street. So the rats are a curse for them, and they eat their food, they eat their staples and that sort of thing. So the real drive of this thing was to convince people that my enemy's enemies are my friends. So owls are definitely an enemy to rats, especially barn owls, and they should be embraced in that way. Some of these houses, people didn't want the owls left there. They wanted them taken away. So instead of taking them off to zoos or whatever it is, we took them to the closest school. And we got the school kids, we put up a hacking box for these young owls. We got the school kids to feed them every day, to learn about them, to take some kind of custodianship of them, and then to release them from the school. And the schools were a good place to release young owls from because they were quiet at night for a start, which was a good thing for fledgling owlets. And the school had its own litter problem. So prey availability was pretty high at these places. And in a very densely populated environment, we could find an area that had a little bit of open area to it, even if it was a soccer field or a playing ground or something like that. And the kids all became responsible for these young owls. They had rosters, they fed them on different nights. and it worked very well. It works very well. All the owls had rings put on them, and we've had ring recoveries from these owls. This is the kind of the backbone of what we do. Here's a picture of a densely populated area. You can see a mine dump behind it, Johannesburg. Most of these areas were actually created for the gold mine. So it was bringing labor in from rural areas and putting them in shacks around gold mines where they lived. And so it's almost a very transient environment, even though some of these places have been around for 100 years and people are born and live and die there. The idea is it was never really anybody's home. It was a place where people came to work in Joburg to work on gold mines, and their home was in rural areas or out in the country. So it was never any sort of pride in a suburb. In fact, even these trees that you're seeing here are unusual. Usually there aren't any trees. But strangely enough, this is an area where barn owls absolutely thrive, just because rodent populations are so high. And this is an example. On the right, you've got a picture there of a sort of aerial view of one of these township environments. You can see a school in the middle and all these very closely populated houses around it. And this is a nest with a whole lot of eggs. You can just look at that and see there's 9 barn owl eggs, I think, or 9 or 10 barn owl eggs in that clutch. So these owls are having big clutches just because of the prey availability. And then we get in there, here's them a bit later in this roof. And we get in there, we remove these owlets, put them in a box outside, and everybody is happy. Generally, but there's a picture of a whole lot of, there's a picture of some chicks, owlets, that were, the eggs were laid in a chimney. And this was 35 days or 30 days later. I think there were about 10 owls in this nest. All these owls are alive and eating and thriving, and rats are being delivered to them. And they all went on to fledge. We went back and there was 2 owls in the chimney, and then 1, and then it was empty. And just in terms of nesting sites, there's a shortage of nesting sites. So they're looking for anything they can find. And here's a prime example, all these owls packed in there like sardines. And this was in Alexander Township in Johannesburg. So basically, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Rats are a serious problem. And in South Africa, we're not using traditional rat poison in many of these places because it's expensive for the people who live there. And aldicarb is actually the rat poison of choice in South Africa. So, and aldicarb's banned all over the world or regulated very strictly all over the world, but it isn't in South Africa. So you can actually buy little bags of aldicarb, in South Africa they call it 2-step, because it's once the rat has consumed a meal of aldicarb, it takes 2 steps before it falls over dead. And the way people use it in this country is mealie meal is our staple diet. So at the end of the evening, they'll take mealie meal and they'll put aldicarb in it, and they'll position it all over the house for the rats to eat, to kill the rats. But you're getting children, toddlers and things like that, that are getting up, walking around, finding this mealie meal and eating it. And we have about 100 deaths a year from kids that have eaten aldicarb or eaten a rat poison in these areas. And it's a real problem, and it's not regulated. It comes in with truck drivers and things from other places in Africa. It's very cheap, and it's lethal, not just for rats, but for owls and for everything else. So that's one of our concerns here. And then we have stories like this. Giant killer rat, 3-month-old baby girl was eaten alive by monster rats. Rodents are a real problem. I mean, they're not really monster rats, but we get the same rats as everyone else. But they're hungry, and they'll eat whatever they can find. So, and the reality of it is that these areas, these high density areas, are great for rats, and as a result, they're also great for owls. So one of the educational things that we do with all these children is we do owl pellet dissections, and the kids are involved in breaking up those pellets. They've got coordinates of where those owl pellets come from, and they contribute to this owl database. They also do the owl releases, but the owl pellet dissections are usually, we do that across the board with children, with adults, with their parents, and all of those things. And they learn essentially what owls are eating, which are rats, and that's kind of enough for them to understand that it's just a nocturnal bird that eats rats, and they don't like rats, so let it be. We also do art projects with kids. This is an old slide, so I think it's 2,000 children back then, but we must be up to almost 10,000 now. So the owl boxes we put up, we take the offcuts and we make little bits of owl art, and these kids paint them or put them together and paint them. And some of this owl art has been displayed all over the world. This is, these are kids dissecting pellets. I know they're all wearing gloves and masks. This was pre-COVID. So these are not COVID gloves and masks. These were and on the table there you can see a little bottle with the coordinates of where that pellets come from, and they look for it. They work out. They've got a key there. They work out what rodent it is, and if they find something interesting like bird skulls or something like that, they'll put everything back in that bottle. We'll collect them, and then we add it to a database. But it's working. These kids are learning. They're learning. And the nice thing about this project, I mean, here's a whole lot of kids that have participated with their owl-friendly owl participation certificate. And so far, 75 schools have participated, and over 260,000 children. In 1,000 odd barn owls have been released in this program from these schools over the last 20 years. And the interesting thing about it is, because of the mythological fear, all of these kids have to take a slip home to their parents, and they have to get consent to participate because of the mythological fears. So parents have to sign a consent form. And we found that the education from children up to parents, because a lot of their parents don't have the same schooling opportunities as these kids are having. So they're very proud that their children are going to school and getting a good education. And they tend to, or often, hang on every word that their kids come home with from school in the afternoon. And these kids are educating their parents about the value of owls to the environment and to them in terms of rodent control. So that's been an important part of the signed parental consent. Here's some of the owl art. We've got thousands of these little wooden owls that kids have painted, and some of them, actually, there's some in America, there's some in Austria. I know that they're kind of traveling around the world. And these are all made from offcuts, recycled wood, and offcuts that come out of the owl boxes. And yeah, it's all, well, it's been going for 20 years. And these kids we're actually now meeting kids 20 years later who are adults and are owl friendly and are sort of, saying things like, well, if I'm scared of something, all I need to do is go and learn about it, because that'll help me with my fear, which is basically the crux of this whole project. Some of the things we've looked at, we've had questionnaires that we've asked kids who've participated and kids who haven't participated. Things like, do you think owls are scary? Do you think owls can be used for medicine or Muti? And we've got the participants and the non-participants, and it's obvious that the kids who've participated in these projects are owl friendly. They think owls help with nature, kids who haven't. But the interesting thing about this is that we gave these questionnaires to 2,000 children, and participative children and non-participative children who'd participated and not participated in this project. And we found, we could see immediately the difference between these kids. But what was interesting was we also sent this questionnaire to their parents, and we found exactly the same relationship between kids who'd participated and parents of kids who'd participated, as opposed to kids and parents who hadn't participated, which was very interesting. But strange enough, one of the other mythological fears that a lot of kids or people in these areas have is for bats. So we thought, we haven't done any bat education, but let's do the same questionnaire relating to bats. And we sent that out, and we got very similar results as to the owl results. So not only were these kids owl friendly, they were actually more environmentally friendly, which was interesting. They were less mythologically constricted, if that's the correct word to use. So here's a whole lot of kids peering into an owl basket. These are young owls that have arrived at their school. These kids are getting to greet them. I don't know if this is my last slide. Have I been? Yeah, my time's up. These, I'm hoping, are the future environmental ministers of South Africa, all peering at a whole lot of owls, some kids waving at them. And that's basically the work that we do in South Africa, and that's what we've been busy with, attempting to change kids' minds. Yep, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation on the state of owl conservation in Southern Africa, Jonathan. Does anyone have any questions for Jonathan about his presentation that he's just given? If not, just to round off the talk nicely, I have a question myself. Would you consider this situation that owls find themselves in South Africa as a classic case of people encroaching on natural habitats, leading to owls living in these urban areas? Or was it more of a case of the owls coming afterwards to these areas after people are settled there?
Yeah, I think these are essentially or predominantly barn owls, and I think they are there because of humans. The humans have contributed to the rodent population in these areas, and barn owls are just attempting as much as they can to access rodents, irrespective of mythology, irrespective of persecution. They're just in there having super clutches because rodent populations are so high.
Yeah, by the sounds of it, traditional healing and mythology seems very much embedded in the psyche of many South Africans and people in Southern Africa. Do you see that changing in any way in the near future to favor conservation of species?
I think it's changed already. I think we're starting to get to a sort of tipping point. I think 260,000 kids and their parents. I mean, it's one of the things that always frustrates me is that when we started this all those years ago, I thought I wanted to get to a situation. I mean, we hear a narrative here all the time saying, well, Black people don't like owls. Black people don't like owls. And I was hoping to change that narrative with this kind of project. Now I'm not as I don't know what the word is, but now I'm trying to get people to change this narrative to, well, not all Black people don't like owls, you know, but the reality of it is in South Africa, when I speak to the press and they talk to me about this, I say, go into any one of those participating schools and speak to the first child that you meet, the child or the teacher or the parent walking towards you, and ask them what they think about owls. And they'll give you the standard answer, which is Bamba Amagundwan, which is Zulu for that bird catches rats. And I think that's changed. I think sometimes mythology is one of those things that we kind of cling to because it's been historic, you know, and that's what we think. But at this stage, I think our mythological fear of owls in this country is definitely on the way out.
Great. That sounds like we're moving in the right direction of travel for the conservation of owls in South Africa. So thank you very much for informing us a little more about the relationships between the people and the owls in South Africa, which I myself had never heard about before. So it's definitely nice to learn something new. So thank you very much for your presentation there, Jonathan.